Quiet. Quiet. We can hear you. Close the door. Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null and I'd like to welcome you to our program. This is the Empowerment Hour. We explore the latest on health and healing, environmental issues, social issues that relate to our well-being. We have a guest on, including what we call conversations with remarkable minds, individuals who have very unique and cutting-edge insights into the issues of our day. Today we have all that. We're going to talk about climate wars, but from a different perspective. From our perspective, we're going to ask a simple question. When we talk about climate, we can agree or disagree that there is a problem, whether it's human-made or not. But what happens when it gets so bad that people no longer care about what politicians are saying or scientists are saying? They're simply out of water. Where are they going to get it? Or they're out of food. Or their land has been so denatured that they can't sustain life on it. Then there's conflict. And we see that now. We see it in Darfur, in the Sudan. So my guest today will be Professor Harold Velser, who's a leading critic of how we're dealing with all this. We'll talk with him about that. Also, does meat kill more people than cigarettes? How is that possible? Well, we're going to give you some original insights from Kathy Freston from Alternet. Keep in mind that we have been propagandized for almost a century that eating meat 3 times a day is what we need. I grew up where my mother, who was a very conscientious person, believed that as long as we had bacon and eggs, milk for breakfast, we were giving our families what they needed. Some type of bologna sandwich or Spam sandwich with tomato soup, that was just the ticket for lunch for most kids where I grew up. And then fried chicken or pot roast. And never once did anyone question, could this in any way be leading to our disease? In fact, we couldn't even put that in our mind because it would ask us to try to balance 2 realities simultaneously, that something we were told was good for us and necessary was also going to cause cancer, stroke, high blood pressure, colorectal diseases. How do you balance those 2 when you grow up in an environment where you're taught first and foremost, never challenge authority? And we didn't until my generation began to look at the wars in Vietnam, the women's rights movement, civil rights issues, environmental issues, and start to challenge authority. Today we're going to challenge the whole idea that we need meat at all, and that it may cause more deaths than cigarettes. Also today, you've been listening to comments about the American soldier who went ballistic and shot a number of completely innocent people, women and children mainly, and immediately the spin control went into effect. This is not what we're about. We're a peaceful country, and I believe that we have to take a different look. So I'll be quoting from a person who served in Afghanistan and Iraq and was in Fallujah in Iraq, Ross Caputi, who's going to show that what is the difference between a soldier going house to house in the middle of the night and blowing the brains out of kids and a drone that hits a house in the middle of the night and blows the brains out of kids. Oh, I see. One is collateral damage. It's not intentional. The other is intentional. Forgive and don't talk about one because it's collateral damage in the name of peace and freedom and democracy, and the other is it is an aberration of anything that's normal. We're going to do a commentary on that. So we have a lot to talk about, including something that I didn't expect it to be this blatant. But when it comes to nuclear radiation, where do we put our spent fuel rods that are going to still be highly radioactive for the next 1,000 years? Nobody wants them. Not in their backyard, not in any state. Well, we found a place. And according to Common Dream staff, it's now been passed in the legislature in Australia. The Australian government, quote, has passed legislation today that allows nuclear waste to be stored at Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory. So, what does that mean? That the original natives of Australia, the Aborigines, do not deserve the same concern about their health and the safety of their environment? So we're dumping all this radioactive waste from around the world on Aborigines? That tells us a lot about the integrity of the people who make these decisions. Coming up next week, pimping for Big Pharma. The FDA, how does it get away with it? What does it do? What are the worst 12 drugs that Americans are taking every day? What are the worst 12 foods that Americans are taking every day? What are the worst 12 beverages Americans are taking every day? Next week, the Dirty Dozen and the different ways that we consume them. Let's begin. For many years, tobacco companies were able to maintain a strong pro-tobacco facade. Smoking focuses the mind, we were told. It's good for you. In fact, I found full-page ads in the Journal of the American Medical Association, page after page of ads emphasizing that smoking was good for your nerves, soothed your throat, and calmed you down. In fact, there was one that said 47,000 physicians smoke or recommend smoking Lucky Strikes. My mother was one of those individuals who smoked Lucky Strikes, as she ended up with breast cancer, and then finally died of a stroke at the age of 58. She was also taking synthetic hormone replacement therapy. I never knew a day growing up where my home was not filled with smoke. Every member of my family smoked except myself. Now we know about secondhand smoke. The question is, how much damage did that do to myself or others? A lot. But no one knew. Every single meal was followed by coffee with sugar and cigarettes. It was a ritual. According to Kathy Freston, quote, for many years after the lethal effects were universally known and undeniable, some of our nation's smartest and most successful businessmen continue to believe, because it was in their interest to believe, that nicotine is not addictive. I was reminded of how far tobacco has fallen reading the New York Times Magazine interview with perhaps the most successful screenplay writer in history, Joel Esterhaus, who has lost 80% of his larynx to tobacco and has apologized for his glamorization of smoking in such films as Basic Instinct. When I think about the effect of animal products on human health, I'm reminded how quickly we've done a national about-face on tobacco. And I look forward to the day when the Times Magazine has a similar apology from someone who promoted animal products, because the evidence in it continues to grow. Animal products kill a lot more Americans than tobacco does. The West's three biggest killers, heart disease, cancer, and stroke, are linked to excessive animal product consumption. The vegetarians have much more lower risks for all three categories. Vegetarians also have a fraction of obesity and diabetes rates as the general population. Of course, both diseases are at an epidemic level and are getting worse. But much more important than the vegetarian community's general statistics are what can be done with the right vegetarian diet. For some years now, doctors have been not just preventing, but even reversing heart disease using low-fat vegetarian diets. That's right, the disease that kills almost as many Americans as everything else combined cannot be just prevented, but reversed with a low-fat, plant-based diet, as documented by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn in Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And there's a link from animal product consumptions to our country's #2 killer, too. According to the American Institute for Cancer Research, about as much cancer could be prevented by diet and exercise as is caused by smoking. And you know what's causing all that cancer? It's not whole grains or legumes or fruits or vegetables. Dr. T. Colin Campbell has documented the link between cancer and animal products. There's a lot of money in the meat industry. Just like there's a lot of money in big tobacco. For many years, the tobacco establishment pointed to elderly smokers like George Burns and millions of others as proof that their very natural product, tobacco, could not be harmful. Even long-distance runners and members of the military could be found smoking a cigarette at the end of a long run or intense drill. Similarly, today the meat industry points to the fact that there are an awful lot of old meat eaters conveniently ignoring our sky-high heart disease and cancer rates, as well as our ballooning rates of obesity and diabetes, all of which are linked to their products. Bill Clinton went on what he was told was a healthy diet after his emergency quadruple bypass in 2004, and yet he did not lose weight or feel better, and he required follow-up surgery in 2010. After that surgery, he was introduced to the work of Dr. Campbell and went on to become a vegan. He has lost 24 pounds in a year and feels much better. Well, here's what the doctor wrote in his Tobacco Mea Culpa, quote, "My hands are bloody, so are Hollywood's. My cancer has caused me to attempt to cleanse mine. I don't wish my fate upon anyone in Hollywood, but I beg that Hollywood stop imposing it upon millions of others," end quote. He could just as easily have been writing about animal foods, which is why I was delighted to read Mark Bittman's book recently that talked about that meat consumption is down more than 10% since 2007. That is the end of that. And here are my thoughts. As a vegan, as someone who has emphasized the importance of a meatless diet for my entire career, as someone who has conducted more than 27 major clinical trials with over 30,000 individuals, all of whom experience loss of weight, increased energy, reduction or elimination of their diseases, from arthritis to heart disease, from different cancers to multiple sclerosis. There is absolute proof with hundreds of major studies that a healthy vegan diet that includes lots of grains, legumes, and nuts and seeds and tubers and spices and juicing and moderate fasting, when we apply those principles, then we will not have the same fate as the last 3 generations. And by the way, consider that when my father ate, my mother insisted he eat a 2-inch steak, meaning 2 inches thick. Why? Because it showed that on her very meager income, that she could still provide her family with good food. My father loved the taste of fat, and so therefore my mother would keep a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of fat around the entire piece of steak. There was also white muffins that were served, or biscuits. There was margarine, because we thought we were doing something healthy by substituting butter for margarine. Remember, that whole 30-year campaign turned out to be complete fraud, giving us trans fats. So just imagine people who didn't know that burning meat so it could be edible created cancer-causing agents. Drinking alcohol with meat caused nitrosamines in the stomach. That the highly processed carbohydrates cause cancer, smoking caused cancer before and after a meal, the meat itself in the meal caused cancer. Any wonder that it took us till now to finally recognize as a nation what we're doing? But instead of having healthy vegan shows with lifestyle on television, it's about meat. It's about processed foods. When I look at these cooking shows, I'm just amazed how little we have learned. And who are these 10% of Americans who are changing their lifestyle? 90% of them are teenagers who, for ethical reasons, don't want to eat an animal. And even those are not healthy vegans, because they'll eat a pizza without the pepperoni and think that that's healthy, and continue to drink colas and coffee and sugar and trans fats. If we only had a way of explaining to the American public en masse that you could be a healthy vegan, we would see obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, and in the older population, dementia, Alzheimer's, fatigue, insomnia, digestive problems, all completely eliminated or substantially reduced. One last thing when it comes to our health, We know that cranberry and cranberry juice unsweetened is great for helping prevent bladder infections. But here's something else it does. According to the latest study, it says that, and this is from the Mayo Clinic, it says cranberry extract prevents hardening of the arteries. Well, that's a lot more important than just having a healthy bladder. Let me report this from the Mayo Clinic. It says it's also good for your bones. And so it helps osteoblast, and it plays a role in your metabolism. It helps build strong bones, and it turns out that it helps prevent hardening of the arteries, which of course we know is one of the leading causes of heart disease in the United States. It keeps your arteries pliable and soft and your circulation improved. And for all the pregnant women out there, please don't use cell phones. Why? The latest study from Scientific Reports says that cell phone use in pregnancy may increase behavioral disorders in your offspring. This is from Yale University. So the question is, if a cell phone would adversely affect the developing fetus in a pregnant woman, what's it doing to everyone else who's not pregnant? Does it mean it's not adversely affecting DNA and chromosomes? Of course it is. There are over 52 separate studies now showing there's a danger to using cell phones. All you have to do is look at an MRI of someone using a cell phone and not using one, and how long after using a cell phone before you start seeing a reddening of the brain, meaning excessive heat in the brain? Under 60 seconds. So how long do they say you could use a cell phone without experiencing damage to your cells? 2 minutes a week. 2 minutes a week. So those are some of the latest issues that we should pay attention to. I'm Gary Null, back in a moment with our guest. Please stay with us.
You know you make me wanna kick my heels up and throw my hands up and throw my head back and come on now. Don't forget to say you will. Don't forget to say yeah, 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 yeah. Say you will. Say it right now, baby. Say you will. Come on. Say you will. Say it better, yeah. Come on now. Say that you love me. Say that you need me. Say that you want me. You wanna please me. Come on now. Come on now. Come on now. I still remember when you used to be 9 years old.
I'd like to welcome all of you. I'm Gary Null, and you can watch today's program in our new studios in New York City by going to progressiveradionetwork.com or GaryNull.com. And don't forget, you can download our most downloadable program of the week, and that is the Progressive Commentary Hour. We have dozens of programs on very important issues that are not broadcast anywhere else, with a panel on one single theme per Monday night at 7 p.m. You can download it anytime you wish. The same is true for our Sunday evening program on Talkback. It's no guests, just health and nutrition issues for the entire hour. Please download those shows as well. Now, there's new technology that allows an individual who may not have a computer or may not know how to use a computer to listen to this broadcast over the telephone. Here's the number to call if you'd like to listen to the program over the phone: 832-280-0066. 832-280-0066. A little later on in the program, we're going to play you a clip, a very disturbing one. We now have evidence that an Amish farmer producing some organic milk was arrested, imprisoned, tortured, abused under provisions of Homeland Security. We warned you this was happening. Now we have absolute proof, and you'll hear the person discussing what happened to this person for simply selling raw milk. That is James Stewart, owner of Rawsome Foods in Venice, California, on the Mike Adams Natural News program. James was arrested with Sharon Palmer, a farmer running Health Family Farms that provides raw milk to cooperative groups. James was arrested through a SWAT team sting operation involving the FDA, the FBI, and the local LA police. James, along with Sharon Palter, were later arrested a second time at the courtroom during their preliminary hearing for not having answered a phone call from Ventura County authorities. While in prison, he was subjected to torture through forced starvation, sleep deprivation, involuntary medical testing, and spending hours in a raw, biologically sewage-filled room. You'll hear that interview shortly. But let's go to our guest who's standing by now. In Germany, he is Professor Harold Welser. He is a socio-psychologist specializing in the history of violence and climate change issues. He is also the head of the Center for Interdisciplinary Memory Research at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Humanities in Essen, Germany. And he is the author also of Climate Wars: Why People Will Be Killed in the 21st Century. Nice to have you with us today. Hello, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Hello.
Hi. I believe that Americans can benefit greatly from hearing voices in Europe, such as your own and elsewhere around the world, about shared global problems. Every culture and society uses its own particular lens, very often ideologically based, to perceive globally shared problems. Nevertheless, the cultural differences between regions and countries together present a more holistic vision of a problem when many perspectives gathered and taken into account. With respect to our looking at climate change in our society, we see in the United States right now, we see at least 17 states, such as most of Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, most of California, a lot of Utah, Oklahoma, at least 3/4 of Florida and Alabama, that are suffering some severe perpetual droughts. Then we see areas that have extreme rain. We see the hottest days and the coldest days, the most natural, let's say, storms. We just recently had the most tornadoes in one day, 100 in America's history in one given area. These are now considered the new norm. What most Americans do is we simply turn on the news and see what we should do. And almost without exception, we're told, do nothing. If our home burns down in a forest fire because it was too dry, rebuild it. If you're on an earthquake fault, rebuild it. If you live near the ocean and there's a tsunami, rebuild it. It's amazing that we do not have any plans right now in the United States at all to relocate anyone out of the areas where they're running out of water in the near future, that will not be able to support the people, industry, and natural resource usage of that water. The average American is clueless about the natural limitations of finite resources. Now that's in the United States, so we're simply in denial. If it gets really bad, we watch Jersey Shore or Donald Trump. We almost never do anything proactive. That's Americans. But in other countries, that's not the case. Would you please give us your perspective in depth about what you see the problems to be in countries that don't have the convenience that we have of living in such denial, and where if they're not aware of climate change, or if they are aware of climate change, they must do something or they could die, and frequently are dying because of the limitations of the resources that are made available to them, even though the wealthy and powerful and those in charge of their country never suffer from starvation or thirst or any problems about their environment, because they can live in the protected green zones, or they can use the resources all they want, but not the rest of their people. That is my issue. Would you please address this? Take your time.
Yeah, of course, we see, of course, very huge differences in coping with the threats of the future when you compare countries like Germany compared to the United States, or then the even much more problematic situations, for example, in Africa and whatever. So first thing is, of course, the awareness concerning this problem. You mentioned that there's a great tendency of denial, that there is nothing going on really severe and nothing going on that will alter our conditions of survival in the future very severely. In Germany, and also in other Western European countries, people are aware that we will face severe problems with extreme weather events and things like that, although Central Europe is, of course, not in the center of the most severe impacts of climate change. But in other countries, like in the middle of Africa, there are no capacities to cope with the disasters that are coming up or already there. So we have a problem in facing climate change, first of all, in the different stages of awareness in the whole world. There are even countries that don't care about these things at all.
All right. I'm going to ask you two issues back to back, and if you could connect them, I would appreciate it. Aside from internal conflicts within a country being fueled by climate change threats and resources, there's also the problem of mass immigration. We're now seeing that, for example, in Syria, where they're going into other countries like Lebanon because they want to get out of the conflict zone. Why? Because their homes are being bombed. But what about when it's not about bombing homes or internal civil war, but they simply don't have the resources? So one group, like for example in Yemen is running out of water. They're out of water. And also, how about Jordan? Jordan's out of water. Where are you going to put these millions of people? So they're going to start migrating wherever they can find water. To them, there's no such thing as a sovereign boundary. You know, they're going to go wherever they can survive. Do you see that this mass migration from one area that cannot support a person to another area that may not be able to support them either, that this could lead to substantial conflicts between those countries and between people?
Of course. I mean, we have, with this type of environmentally based migration, we have two different areas of problems. One is internal migration, where people don't leave the borders of their countries but migrate inside the country. And this is taking place in countries that are very poor and very problematic in terms of a functioning state and whatever. So we have an increase of internal conflict. And then we have the other problem that you already mentioned, that these migrants cross the borders or try to cross the borders. And of course, it is evident that these processes will increase in the nearer future and are already increasing. But what for example, the European Union does is simply making the borders, from their point of view, more safe or more secure. That means they invest in the border security and try to keep the people out of the country. So this is, of course, increasing the problems in the countries where they are based or where they ended up. And but the tendency to cope with these problems by the richer countries is, of course, to identify it as a security problem, not as anything else. And the solution is keep the people out, whatever the cost for this might be.
Okay. We are a nation above and beyond all other nations in the world that promotes the idea of globalization. Globalization is being driven by a false premise that infinite economic growth is possible and resources will always be available to keep the engine of neoliberal capitalism running. The ideology behind the captains of the pro-globalization machine, as defined by corporate capitalism, is that the peoples of the world should be uniform, homogenized into a single world community, espousing the assumed benefits and blessings promised by this capitalist democracy. However, in light of climate change, this entire strategy, I believe, will fail. And since, as you have noted, climate increases inequality, also many critics of economic globalization are quick to point out that globalization also widens the gap between the wealthy and the poor. Moreover, we are witnessing that nations coming together into one world model, nationalism and division, is increasing. So would you be able to connect these different threads together, climate, neoliberal globalization, and nationalism, ideological trends, and how it is related to the likelihood of increased violence and wars in the future if we're all supposed to live under one government, one currency, one set of rules, and always with 1/10 of or 1/100th of 1% of the people of the world controlling all this without any real democratic input. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's of course a total fiction that there will be something like a world government or a unifying rule over the world. In the moment we have almost 200 different nation states in the world, and of course in the situation of very different potentials to cope with future problems with very different levels of economy, wealth, growth, and things like that. So the situation is completely different from what we would find as something like a world society or something like this. And as you already said, the future development will lead to a deeper division between these societies, a deeper differentiation between the winners and the losers, especially because one of the effects of global warming is that it is not an equal distribution of these impacts, but a very unequal. The countries that are poor and not that developed are suffering the most, while the richer and more responsible societies suffer not that much from it or even profit from it. So what will happen if you take in respect that the richer countries are better organized in coping with these problems and better organized in establishing power and things like that, we will see something which we can call a failed globalization, a distribution of a globalized world into winners and losers. And this is, of course, a major source for violent conflict, because if people are really losing their survival conditions, they have only one chance to do something, and this is, on the one hand, migrate, and on the other hand, fight for food and water and whatever they need to survive.
My last question, and I believe that your last statement is prophetic. I believe in the next 5 years you will see people being forced in the United States to migrate from the spreading cancer of suburban ghettoization, where the middle class, the working class have lost the standards that they had lived with from the 1940s to the 1970s, and will only get worse. More home foreclosures because the economy is not rebounding for these individuals. On the other hand, a lot of people in the United States who may be financially well off are now living in areas where, for example, one of the most, we might say, one of the most perfect environments in the United States to live, at least for progressive people, is in Austin, Texas. Yet Austin is in such a severe water-restricted area that those beautiful lawns that everyone prided themselves on are all dead because they can only water about once every week, and that's going to go to once every 2 weeks. So forget having anything that requires water in your immediate surroundings. You also won't be able to have the water coming into your home on the same conditions. The same is true in Florida. They actually fly helicopters with heat-sensitive equipment over whole neighborhoods every night to see if anyone's illegally watering their lawns late at night when a bureaucrat might not be coming up and down the street as they would in the daytime. So it's getting very serious. But the public hasn't been informed. So I believe people will be forced, for simply a lack of resources, to move from where they're at, even in beautiful areas, in communities and gated communities, especially in the West, the Southwest. I believe those are going to be really far worse hit. But my larger final question to you and statement is this. Right now, and for the past 30 years, the entire world has been looking at the United States as the model to follow. We're only 4% of the world's population now, and yet we consume between 25 to 20% of its entire resources. So now China and India are both catching up. They have about 1.3 billion people each. Both have a larger working upper middle class than the entire population of the United States. And they want everything we have. They want the meat, and they want the fried chicken. They want the cars. They want a television in every room. They want our lifestyle without learning any of the lessons. So the Chinese now are buying the largest natural resources on the planet They're in competition with Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the United Emirates and other countries going into Africa and other places and buying humongous tracts of land so that they can exploit them for their minerals, which are required in computers and other things that people want, but also for food, where they can control it. In doing so, they're not stopping and ask, should our only motivation be to continue growing and expanding our consumption? They're not bringing their growth engines down. And we in the United States are angry because we're not living at the same standard for the average person that we had for 40 years. So everyone wants to get back to the good old days. My thought is the good old days was a reckless rush to exploit all of our resources without any thought of the consequences. Shouldn't we at this point be looking at how we can downsize our lives, become more austere, understand which of our resources are finite, from water, which we're past, and oil, which we're past, and land, which we've eroded, and look at the consequences of this? Or do we have that even capacity to be that honest with us in a national dialogue, which we've refused to have? There's been no national dialogue on what happens to, should we continue globalization and neoliberal policies of ever more growth and ever more consumption, or should we be having the idea of bring it all back, tone it down, stop the meat, stop using pesticides, stop genetic engineering, bring ourselves back to using natural resources? Do you even feel we have the capacity to have that conversation, let alone engage in it? Your thoughts. Final question.
I think it is not even a question of a choice, because if we continue business as usual, this business as usual cannot be continued for a very long time, because all the things that you mentioned, overuse of resources, overpollution and things like that, will lead to a very severe increase of stress on our societies. So prices for raw materials will rise, environmental stress will rise, and things like that. So life won't be like this anyway. So we are now in a situation where we can choose between only being reactive, waiting, seeing what is going to happen, and try to react upon this while seeing all our chances disappear. Or we can choose to be proactive and see we are members of the wealthiest societies in the world, and every one of us has space, has room to maneuver, doing different things, and opt for the alternative that you mentioned, that we have to go back in many respects, becoming less mobile than we are, having a completely different way of nurture ourselves, different ways of food and things like that, and of course different ways of living together and establishing a social way of life that will be at the same time sustainable. And I think it's very easy to choose between these alternatives.
I would share a different perspective on your last comment. I absolutely believe that you hit it right on the nail, but I believe it is not easy in our society and in your society or in the French society or Italian society to simply go back. Because for the average person, first and foremost, they're conditioned. They've been propagandized, and they have been given a mindset that they're somehow entitled to everything. And then one day it's taken away, or they have to have less of it. Then their whole life is based upon getting people into power who become very militaristic, almost fascistic, and guaranteeing the good old days and bringing back the growth. And that's not going to happen, but they'll lose their rights in the process, as we are in the United States. Having smaller communities of more progressive people who are willing to change their whole social contract to live off the main grid and create their own interconnected communities where a quality of life and more ethical and moral sharing is the emphasis. That, I believe, is entirely doable, but I believe only about 10% of the American population, in fact, I believe that maybe more in your society, because I'm not that familiar with it. I don't want to make a judgment. But in the United States, I do know a lot about how people think. And I believe that 90% of the American population will never make any change ever under any conditions. I don't care if they live on a fault that is about to go, if they live in a hurricane alley, if they live on the beach and there's a tsunami coming, they'll batten down and tough it out thinking somehow it'll be a better day tomorrow. And there's going to come a time when we're not going to have better days or food, and then we're going to go out and rent a copy of Soylent Green and remind ourselves that that was science fiction 25 years ago in the movie with Charlton Heston, and it may be the future on some level. Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing your insights, and hopefully people will read your very important book, Climate Wars. My guest, Professor Harold Wessler, W-E-L-Z-E-R, pronounced Welser, from Germany. All the best to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Now to a commentary. And if you'd like to call in and address this commentary, you can call after my commentary, which is from Ross Caputi from Common Dreams at 888-874-4888, 888-874-4888. As you know, I believe, if you've been listening to my program, that you cannot neatly and surgically separate off an innocent person dying by collateral damage, by not intending directly to kill that person, but they're dead anyhow. Death is death. And an innocent child or a person not involved in your conflict is not a threat to you. To kill that person is still to kill that person. We're trying to make it seem in the media today that, okay, we're in Afghanistan for the right reason. It's the just war. We're not leaving anytime soon. We've supported a corrupt regime, but that's all right because all regimes are corrupt. And even though we didn't have money for a single payer health insurance, and even though 12 million children are going to bed hungry in the United States, and even though we didn't do a thing to help 9 million Americans who lost their homes, or 9 million homes that were lost, with over 36 million Americans made homeless without any care where they slept, where they went, when we have hidden the real facts of unemployment because we couldn't handle a 20% unemployment rate, when Wall Street is a fixed game and we all know it, when there is absolute corruption at every level of government, and we accept that, where the media is biased, and we accept that on the left and right. And we accept that 90% of every dollar that went in, over $1 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq, all that is wasted, and we accept that. But we cannot accept that anyone died over there under any other pretense than saving Afghanistan and saving Iraq for democracy and freedom. That we're strong on. We're exceptional on that. Yeah? Well, we offer a challenge to that kind of mindset. The death of innocent civilians is nothing new in Afghanistan, but these 16 victims, 9 of whom were children, were allegedly murdered by a rogue soldier rather than the usual killers, drone airstrikes and stray bullets. This incident has elicited rage among Afghans and Westerners alike. But why were Westerners not equally outraged when drone attacks killed entire families? Drone attacks that kill civilians usually fall into our category of collateral damage because the dead civilians weren't specifically targeted. And we treat this category as an unfortunate consequence of war, but not murder. Afghans, however, see no difference. Rightly so, in my opinion, because their loved ones are dead because of the conscious actions of NATO and American forces. This distinction between collateral damage and murder seems to come down to the question of intent. It was Thomas Aquinas who was one of the first to hone in on this distinction with his doctrine of double effect, which is still used today to justify collateral damage. It is believed in the West that some innocent death is excusable in war as long as the deaths are not intended, but even if those deaths are foreseeable. But if civilian deaths are foreseeable in a course of action and we take that action anyway, did we not intend them? I doubt Afghans would feel much consolidation knowing that their family members were not directly targeted. Rather, we just expected that our actions would kill some Afghans, and it happened to be their family members, and an unfortunate side effect of war. Yet Western audiences feel reassured knowing that most of the civilian deaths in Afghanistan were not intended. And they only became outraged when Marines and soldiers clearly targeted civilians and killed women and children, urinated on their bodies, plundered their body parts as trophies. From Abu Ghraib to Fallujah and Haditha, U.S. forces have committed massacres against civilians. These incidents stand out in the Western mind, but to Afghans and Iraqis, they are no different from the daily slaughter of civilians by drones, airstrikes, and depleted uranium and stray bullets. Tell a mother from Fallujah whose children have been horribly deformed by uranium weapons that her children's suffering was unintended, even though the health effects of uranium-based weapons are well known. Tell the survivors of drone attacks that their dead family members were not targeted and that their deaths were an unfortunate consequence of war. Is their pain any different from the father whose entire family was murdered in the most recent atrocity? If collateral damage is foreseeable, if it is really a fact of war, as most believe it is it not a crime to engage in a war when it will inevitably kill innocents? Is there really a morally significant difference between murder and collateral damage? The consequences are extreme, and there is an argument that the good results outweigh the bad, that democracy, just listen to John McCain and all the other superhawks, and freedom, and the liberation of Afghan women. Oh, has that actually happened? No, it hasn't. Will improve the lives of Afghans so much that the deaths of a few hundred, a few thousand, a few 100,000 are justified. This is an easy judgment for Westerners to make from the comforts of their own homes, but it stinks of the same patriarchy and arrogance, misogyny of the white man's burden that justifies colonialism for so many years. Has anyone consulted Afghans and asked them if they think the good that the West has promised will come of this occupation is worth the lives of their family members? The occupation of Afghanistan is an atrocity-producing situation, as was the occupation of Iraq, and we have signed Afghan and Iraqis up for this against their will. In conclusion, the nature of these occupations fosters atrocity. The invented enemy, the lack of a battlefield void of civilians, the supposed moral superiority of the occupiers, the obscure goals of the mission, the methods of training that prepare soldiers for occupation, and the methods of warfare all make the murder of civilians unavoidable. In modern warfare, 90% of the casualties, let me repeat this, 90% of all the people who die in any of our wars are civilians. But this, we in the West and in the media, we ignore. In my experience, soldiers and Marines face an unbearable quantum of pressure and responsibility, and this inevitably leads to atrocity. When this soldier was deployed in Iraq in 2004 with the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, and faced conflicting expectations from their leaders who wanted dispassionate obedience, from our society back home who wanted a Hollywood-style victory and a happy ending, from the families who wanted to see us put their needs first, from the comrades in arms who wanted our loyalty, and from ourselves as we struggled to hold on to our humanity. As much as we wanted to please everyone, we couldn't. We were only human, asked to bear inhuman burdens, and the result was inhumane behavior. Your thoughts, your opportunity to call back and share your points of view. I see no difference between collateral damage and intentional killing. 888-874-4888. 888-874-4888. I'm Gary Null. Back in a moment. Please stay with us.
You better stop dogging me around. If you don't.
We're just going to take a minute here before your calls come in to offer you a special. Remember, this is the only program on 24/7 that ever has to raise any money, and I'm not aware of any other non-commercial 24/7 real live radio station that doesn't have anyone pitching. So we'll just take 2 minutes here. But we are giving you a great special. We've been out of coenzyme Q10 for some time. We just got it in today. This is the 120 milligram soft natural gels, and it is a 60 soft gel capsules. And this is on sale today with L-carnitine, and it's an all-natural a vegetarian formula and L-carnitine at 250 milligrams, and these two together with a free DVD, Overcoming Fatigue, A Natural Approach. So you're getting Overcoming Fatigue, A Natural Approach, two of the best things I believe that your body can benefit from. I take coenzyme Q10, I take L-carnitine 3 times a day. That's how important I feel these two nutrients are. Here's the deal. The normal retail price for this combination is $135. Today, you're only going to pay $67. You're getting this for less than half price because that is the special we have. So give a call now to our number, and we will get this right out to you. 877-627-5065. Again, the number is 877-627-5065. Or if you're in Manhattan, you can drop by our 83rd Street Vitamin Closet and pick it up. And this special will be good for 1 week. All right, so we want you to have your coenzyme Q10. It's a superstar. It's in the top 10 nutrients I believe that every American should have every day. And L-carnitine. Look up L-carnitine, 250 milligrams. That's a good dose. And you'll see why I believe we should be having these in our diet. And it's a special to you today. Plus, you're going to get this really interesting, long-playing, 2-hour documentary, Overcoming Fatigue, A Natural Approach. You're getting all that today for that small price. Now, let us see. My monitor isn't up in our new studio, and we'll see if we have any callers coming in right now. All right. If you wish to call and make a comment, you're welcome to do so. We're going to show you now a clip from, I was just told if we take calls, we won't have time for the clip. I'd rather show you the clip because it's very informative. This is from Mike Adams, and this is about what they're doing to a person who wanted to sell raw milk.
What you are about to hear is a true account of an American, a Californian, who was engaged in the distribution of raw milk. But he has been subjected to torture. He was nearly killed. He survived 8 days of torture in the LA County jail system. In his own words, you will now hear him talk about what happened to him in the LA County jail.
No, I'm taken out of line, which I think is very strange, and I'm taken to an office. And in the office are two deputy sheriffs, fairly young guys. I'd say probably in their mid-30s or whatnot. I know the one's man name who then started to interrogate me and accuse me of stuff. His name was Sexton, S-E-X-T-O-N. Mm-hmm. Don't know his first name, but he said, "Are you a sovereign?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "No, you know that is. You're a sovereign." You know, and I kept on saying, "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about." You know, and so this went on for about, I'd say, 5 or 10 minutes, and he finally said, "Well, you're going to be a danger to the population." I didn't admit to anything in there, okay? Mm-hmm. I finally just said to him, I really don't think I should be saying any more in here. And so they take me out, put me into jail garb, and then they put a red band on me, which is now supposedly a danger to the general population of the jail itself. So they're accusing me, I guess, because of the accusation of being a terrorist, i.e. a sovereign, which I never used the word ever. They're the only ones that ever used that word. They put a red band on me, which I didn't know at that moment what that meant.
This reminds me, the FBI put out alerts a few weeks back saying that so-called sovereign citizens or sovereign individuals are a threat to law enforcement and might just shoot people at any time. So it sounds like they were using that, fear-mongering by the FBI, declaring you to be guilty of being a sovereign, which is no crime anyway. I mean, all of us are sovereign citizens. The people run the country, really, read the Constitution. But it sounds like they're using that to then convict you of being a sovereign.
Then they took this long chain about, I guess, probably 15 feet long and wrapped it around my waist about 2-3 times, and then put my hands behind me, and then put the handcuffs on attached to these long chains around my waist. The red band was put on my arm, which I didn't know what it meant at that point, and put into an area where I was supposed to go get medical tests, and now it's my guess is about probably 6:15, 6:30 maybe, and the handcuffs were so tight, I thought my wrists were going to break off. Trust me, I have very wide wrists. He then takes me over to a bench in this area, and besides being handcuffed and shackled, I'm now handcuffed to the bench as well. So now I can't move more than 6 inches either way. I don't have a great back. I'm 65 years old, okay? This is not some young guy who can handle this kind of abuse sitting there on this bench for hours. Thousands of people who don't even deserve to be in there, let alone...
It's a prison society.
Right, let alone me, who absolutely doesn't deserve to be in there, trust me.
Well, even the judge, I heard, when the judge reduced your bail from $1 million to $100,000, didn't he say that this James just sounds like the milkman to me, something like that?
You got the exact words.
So the judge saw some glimmer of truth in all of this. That's encouraging. There are still good people left in law enforcement. There are still good people in the judicial system. It's just that it seems like the bullies and the tyrants have all the power and have, their numbers seem to be growing. It's very scary. Wherever you are right now, they could arrest you right now for no reason and do it all over again.
And that was a bit of an interview. James Stewart, an Amish farmer who has organic raw milk, arrested. And now, as I've been warning, and as we now see under the Defense Authorization Act, Military Authorization Act, he is now considered a terrorist for selling raw milk. And they had to bring in the FBI and the SWAT teams for this. Where will this end? And why isn't this a national outrage? So for those of you who choose not to look for the truth, you won't see this. For those of you who do, you'll see this. I'm Gary Null. We're up to the end of our program. I want to thank you for taking your time. We have never had a piece of publicity on this program. No interviews, no media. And yet, I want to thank the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of new listeners every single day. We are the fastest growing radio program, internet program in the world. And where a lot of the radio programs are shrinking substantially, including, unfortunately, WBAI that lost almost 78% of its entire audience, the largest drop in an audience over a station in my history on radio. I'd never heard of this. We'd like to think that we offer a forum for issues that are important, but with solutions and giving you information that empowers you. That's what we'll continue to do every day. Go to our archives. Stay tuned for Mike Fader, right here on the Progressive Radio Network.
Any day now, I will hear you say goodbye, my love, and you